A 9-year-old girl dying in a mansion that money built. The world's best doctors leaving with empty hands and confused faces. No disease. No diagnosis. No hope. And a quiet nanny who would kneel down one midnight and discover what 20 specialists had missed. This is the story of Olivia Hart, the only child of tech billionaire Jonathan Hart, whose perfect, controlled world shattered when his daughter began fading away for reasons no medical team could name. While neurologists searched for tumors and geneticists hunted for rare syndromes, the answer waited in darkness beneath Olivia's bed, placed there by the one person Jonathan had trusted with his grief. The truth wasn't a disease. It was something far more terrifying. Love twisted into poison, whispered in the dark by someone who should have been safe. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Let me tell you something funny. Someone actually bet that I can't reach 1,000 subscribers before the end of this year, and honestly, I want to prove them wrong. So if you're watching this right now and you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and join the family. Reaching 1,000 subscribers is a very personal goal for me, and your support would mean the world to me. Thank you for believing in me and being part of this journey. And before you go, drop your name and location in the comments. I'd love to give you a special shout out in my next video. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Hart mansion with a rhythm that felt accusatory, relentless. Inside Olivia's bedroom, a space designed by an award-winning architect to be both whimsical and sophisticated, machines hummed and beeped with mechanical precision. And 4 stands stood sentinel beside the canopy bed. Monitors tracked vital signs that refused to tell the story anyone wanted to hear. Dr. Patricia Vance, chief of pediatric medicine at Cedars-Sinai and one of the most respected specialists on the West Coast, stood at the foot of the bed with her tablet clutched against her chest. Her expression was careful, controlled, but her eyes betrayed something close to defeat. "Mr. Hart," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I've consulted with colleagues at Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and Great Ormond Street in London. We've run every test available. Twice." Jonathan Hart didn't turn from the window. His reflection stared back at him, a man who'd negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without flinching, who'd faced down hostile boardrooms and economic collapses with the calm of a chess master. That man felt like a stranger now. And his voice was flat, drained of the authority that usually commanded rooms. "There's no pathology. No infection, no cancer, no autoimmune disorder, no metabolic dysfunction. Her organs are functioning. Her blood work is normal." Then why is she dying? The word hung in the air between them, sharp and terrible. Dr. Vance moved closer, lowering her voice further. "Sometimes children decline for psychological reasons. Severe trauma, depression, what we used to call failure to thrive." "My daughter isn't failing to thrive," Jonathan cut her off, his reflection's jaw tightening. "She's being killed by something, and you're telling me you can't find it." Behind them, Olivia lay so still she barely disturbed the expensive sheets. Her breathing was shallow, her skin the color of old paper. Dark circles made her eyes look sunken, ancient in a face that should have been round with childhood. Her hair, once thick and glossy, had thinned to wisps against the pillow. She looked like a Victorian portrait of a dying child. Beautiful and tragic and utterly wrong. Dr. Vance gathered her materials with quiet efficiency. "I'm not giving up, Mr. Hart. I'll keep researching. But I think..." She paused at the door. "I think you might need more than medical support right now. A child psychologist, perhaps. Someone who specializes in..." "Get out." The words were soft but absolute. Dr. Vance left without another sound, her footsteps disappearing down the marble hallway. Another specialist retreating with nothing but theories and careful suggestions that felt like accusations. What kind of father lets his child waste away? Jonathan finally turned from the window and approached the bed. He moved like a man approaching a shrine, reverent and terrified. Olivia's eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Her chest rose and fell with breaths too shallow to sustain life much longer. 6 months ago, she'd been running through these same halls. Singing. Laughing. Begging him to play tea party even when he had conference calls scheduled. She'd been the loudest, brightest thing in his carefully controlled world. A reminder that life was more than quarterly reports and stock prices. Now she was disappearing, and he had no idea how to stop it. Jonathan Hart's origin story was the kind Silicon Valley loved to tell. Born in a one-bedroom apartment in Oakland, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs, he taught himself to code at 12 on a computer salvaged from a dumpster. By 25, he'd developed an algorithm that revolutionized cloud security. By 35, his company was worth $3 billion. By 40, he'd sold it and built an empire that stretched across 4 continents. He was brilliant, disciplined, and utterly controlled. Every decision was calculated. Every risk was measured. Every problem had a solution if you were smart enough and worked hard enough. That philosophy had carried him from poverty to power. It had also made him believe he was invincible. The mansion itself was a monument to that belief, perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, designed with walls of glass that turned the ocean into living art. Every surface was carefully chosen. Every room was precisely temperature-controlled. Even the landscaping was strategic, creating privacy while maximizing the view. It was stunning. It was also cold in ways that had nothing to do with temperature. His wife, Caroline, had softened the edges. She'd brought warmth, spontaneity, laughter. She'd filled the spaces between his rigid structures with life. And when Olivia was born, the mansion had finally felt like a home. Then Caroline died. A car accident 2 years ago. Sudden, random, the kind of tragedy that made Jonathan's carefully ordered world feel like a lie. One moment she was driving to pick up Olivia from school. The next, a drunk driver ran a red light, and everything shattered. Jonathan had tried to maintain control through the grief. Structure. Routine. Logic. But Olivia had needed something he didn't know how to give anymore. She'd needed her mother. Before the illness, before the fear and the specialists and the machines, Olivia had been extraordinary in the way only children can be. Fearless. Curious. Bursting with opinions about everything from dinosaurs to dessert. She'd inherited Caroline's warmth and Jonathan's intensity. The combination made her magnetic. Jonathan could still remember her at 4 years old, insisting on wearing a princess dress to the company Christmas party. She'd charmed investors and board members with her off-key rendition of Let It Go, completely oblivious to the fact that she was standing in a room of people who controlled billions of dollars. She'd made his heart feel dangerously unprotected. At 7, she'd started asking the hard questions. Why do some people have big houses and some people sleep outside? If you're so smart, why can't you fix climate change? Do you think Mommy can see us from heaven? Jonathan had struggled with those questions. He was good at solving technical problems, not philosophical ones. Caroline would have known what to say. After Caroline died, Olivia changed. The light dimmed a little. The questions became quieter. She clung to routines, the same bedtime stories, the same stuffed animals, the same songs her mother used to sing. Jonathan told himself it was normal grief. That time would heal. He'd been wrong about so many things. It started small, so small that Jonathan convinced himself he was imagining it. 3 months after Caroline's death, Olivia pushed away her breakfast. Not hungry, she mumbled, staring at the pancakes shaped like hearts that the chef had made specially. A week later, she left her dinner untouched. Just tired, she said when Jonathan asked. Then came the complaints about being cold. She wore sweaters in 70-degree rooms. Asked for extra blankets. Curled into tight balls in her enormous bed. Jonathan bought her heated blankets, adjusted the thermostat, had the HVAC system inspected. Nothing helped. The fatigue came next. Olivia would sleep 12 hours and wake up exhausted. She stopped asking to play. Stopped drawing. Stopped singing the off-key songs that used to echo through the hallways. She's grieving, Jonathan told himself. She needs time. But time made it worse. The darkness under her eyes deepened. Her skin took on a grayish tint. Her hair started falling out in the shower. She moved like an old woman, careful and slow, as if her bones hurt. That's when Jonathan called the first specialist. Dr. Chen flew in from Stanford. Ran blood tests. Found nothing. Dr. Morrison came from Boston. Ordered MRIs. Found nothing. Dr. Patel arrived from London. Genetic testing. Found nothing. The parade of specialists turned into an obsession. Jonathan spent hundreds of thousands of dollars flying in experts, booking private hospitals, authorizing experimental tests. Every result came back the same, normal. But Olivia kept shrinking. By her 9th birthday, a celebration she was too weak to attend, she weighed barely 60 pounds. She could no longer walk without assistance. Her voice had become a whisper. Her eyes, once bright with curiosity, looked hollow and ancient. Jonathan sat beside her bed that night, holding her small hand, and felt something he'd never experienced before. Absolute helplessness. All his money, all his intelligence, all his power, none of it mattered. He couldn't negotiate with whatever was taking his daughter. He couldn't outthink it. He couldn't fix it. He could only watch her disappear. Mara Ellis arrived on a Tuesday morning in late October. She came recommended by a colleague who'd heard Jonathan's desperation in a phone call and quietly suggested a different approach. She's not a miracle worker, the colleague had warned. But she sees things other people miss. Jonathan didn't believe in intuition or soft skills or anything that couldn't be measured. But he was out of options. Mara was in her early 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a simple bun and eyes that seemed to catalog everything without judgment. She wore no makeup, no jewelry except a simple watch. Her handshake was firm but not aggressive. "Mr. Hart," she said simply. "Miss Ellis. Thank you for coming." They stood in the foyer, all marble and glass and uncomfortable silence. "I've read the medical files you sent," Mara continued. 23 specialists. 47 different tests. No diagnosis. "That's correct. And you want me to succeed where they failed?" Jonathan hesitated. "I want you to help my daughter." Mara studied him for a long moment. "I can't promise that. But I can promise to pay attention." She moved past him toward the stairs, not waiting for permission or direction. Jonathan followed, feeling strangely off balance. He was used to being in control of conversations, of spaces, of outcomes. Mara walked into Olivia's room like she'd been there 100 times before. She didn't gasp at the medical equipment or react to the child's shocking appearance. She simply pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. "Hello, Olivia," she said softly. "My name is Mara. I'm going to be staying here for a while." Olivia's eyes opened slightly. She studied the stranger with the wariness of a wounded animal. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," Mara continued. "I'm just going to sit here and keep you company. Is that okay?" A tiny nod. Jonathan watched from the doorway, waiting for Mara to do something. Take notes, ask questions, check vitals. She did none of those things. She just sat quietly, her presence steady and calm, while Olivia's breathing slowly evened out. After 20 minutes, Mara stood and walked past Jonathan into the hallway. "She's terrified," Mara said simply. "Of what?" "I don't know yet. But fear that deep doesn't come from nowhere." The rain continued outside. The machines continued their mechanical vigil. And somewhere in the darkness beneath Olivia's bed, something waited to be discovered. Something that would explain everything. And change nothing back to what it was before. Mara Ellis didn't believe in coincidences. In 30 years of pediatric home care, she'd learned that children communicated in ways adults had forgotten how to read. A flinch at a certain name. A refusal to enter a particular room. The way a child's breathing changed when someone specifically walked through the door. Bodies remembered what mouths refused to say. And Olivia Hart's body was screaming. The other caregivers, the parade of nurses and specialists who'd cycled through the mansion over the past 6 months, had treated Olivia like a medical puzzle to be solved. They checked vitals, administered medications, and documented symptoms with clinical precision. Mara did none of those things. Instead, she simply existed in Olivia's space. She sat in the corner chair with a book, turning pages slowly, her presence steady but undemanding. She brought tea she didn't drink, positioned where Olivia could see the steam rising. She hummed occasionally, old melodies without words that filled the silence without requiring response. Jonathan watched this strategy with growing frustration. "Shouldn't you be doing something?" he asked on the third day, finding Mara in her usual position while Olivia slept fitfully. "I am doing something," Mara replied without looking up from her book. "I'm letting her get used to me." The other nurses treated her like a specimen. Mara's voice remained soft, but there was steel underneath. "How did that work out?" Jonathan had no answer. "Let me watch, Mr. Hart. That's what you hired me for." He left her alone after that, and Mara watched. It took 4 days before Mara began to notice the pattern. Olivia's bed was enormous, a custom canopy design with enough space for 3 children. Yet every morning, Mara found her curled into the right side, pressed against the edge as if the rest of the mattress didn't exist. The left side remained pristine, untouched. More than that, avoided. When Mara gently adjusted Olivia's position one afternoon, trying to prevent bed sores, the girl's eyes flew open with something close to panic. "Not there," Olivia whispered, her voice raw. "Please not there." "Okay, sweetheart. We'll stay right here." Mara moved her back immediately, noting the way Olivia's heart rate slowed once she was returned to her chosen territory. The next oddity was the corner. The southwest corner of the room, specifically, where a beautiful antique dresser stood beneath a window that overlooked the garden. It was the brightest spot in the room during the day, filled with natural light and ocean breeze. Olivia wouldn't look at it. If someone stood near that corner, her gaze would slide away, focusing on anything else. When the afternoon sun shifted and illuminated that space, she closed her eyes entirely. "Does that corner bother you?" Mara asked casually one evening, not looking directly at Olivia. A long silence. Then, "It watches." "What watches?" But Olivia had retreated back into silence, her small hands clutching the blanket with white-knuckled intensity. The darkness issue was perhaps the most obvious. Every night, without fail, Olivia's eyes would widen as the sun set. Her breathing would become rapid, shallow. Sometimes she whimpered. "Lights," she'd whisper. "Please. All of them." Jonathan had installed additional lamps, making the room bright as midday even at midnight. The electricity bill for that single room exceeded most people's monthly rent. But still, Olivia watched the shadows. And sometimes, in the deepest hours of night, Mara heard her whispering. Not calling out. Not crying for help. Just talking. Soft, urgent conversations with empty air. The mansion had always been temperature-controlled with algorithmic precision. Jonathan's smart home system regulated every room to exactly 72 degrees, adjusted humidity levels, and filtered air with medical-grade precision. Yet Olivia's room was always cold. Not according to the sensors. Those read a perfect 72. But Mara felt it the moment she crossed the threshold. A bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with thermostats. She'd experienced this before, in other homes where children suffered in ways medicine couldn't reach. Sometimes houses absorbed trauma. Sometimes rooms remembered. The cold spots were worse near the bed, particularly underneath it. Mara noticed other things too. The air vents made sounds they shouldn't, not the normal hum of circulation, but something that sounded almost like whispers. She'd asked Jonathan about it twice. Both times, he'd sent technicians who found nothing wrong. Still, the sounds continued. Then there were the drafts, currents of cold air that moved through the sealed room without source or logic. They'd brush against Mara's neck at odd moments, raising goosebumps, carrying a scent she couldn't quite identify. Not rot. Not decay. Something else. Something deliberately placed. One night, sitting in the hallway outside Olivia's room, Mara saw Jonathan pause at his own bedroom door. He stood there for nearly 5 minutes, key card in hand, staring at nothing. "Mr. Hart." He startled, turned. I thought I heard something." "What?" "I don't know. Singing maybe? But when I listen closely it stops." He laughed without humor. "I'm losing my mind in my own house." Mar didn't tell him she'd heard it too. A woman's voice, distant and distorted, like sound traveling through water. Always at the edge of perception. Always gone when you tried to focus on it. The mansion felt wrong. Not haunted, Mara had learned the difference years ago. This wasn't supernatural. This was something human wearing the mask of the inexplicable. It was Jonathan's assistant, Marcus, who first let the name slip. Mara had been at the mansion for 2 weeks when she encountered him in the kitchen, stress-eating takeout at midnight. "How's she doing?" he asked, knowing Mara would understand he meant Olivia. "Still declining. Slowly but steadily." Marcus pushed his food away, appetite gone. "Jonathan's going to lose her. And it's going to destroy him." He paused. More than Caroline's death did. Caroline was Olivia's mother? Yeah. Car accident. 2 years ago. He rubbed his face. That's when Eleanor started coming around. Said she wanted to help Jonathan through his grief, spend time with her only grandchild. He was too broken to say no. Mara's attention sharpened. Eleanor. Jonathan's mother. She and Jonathan had been estranged for years, since he was a teenager, basically. But after Caroline died, Marcus shrugged. Grief makes people desperate for family, I guess. Why were they estranged? Marcus looked uncomfortable. That's not really my story to tell. But let's just say Eleanor has intense beliefs about sin, redemption, the afterlife. Jonathan built his whole life running away from that kind of thinking. And then he let her back in. Only for a few months. Then something happened, I don't know what, and he cut her off again. Changed the security codes, told the staff she wasn't allowed on the property. Marcus met Mara's eyes. This was about 6 months ago. Right when Olivia's symptoms started. That night, Mara researched. Eleanor Hart had a digital footprint, though sparse. A blog that hadn't been updated in 3 years, filled with posts about spiritual warfare, signs from beyond the veil, the thinness between worlds. The writing was intelligent but fervent, laced with biblical references and warnings about children being vulnerable to influences from the other side. One post, dated shortly after Caroline's death, made Mara's skin prickle. When mothers leave this plane too early, their spirits remain restless. They call out for their babies. The veil is thinnest in the places where love was strongest. Children can hear what we cannot. This is both gift and danger. Another post, from around the time Eleanor must have been visiting. Sometimes reunion requires sacrifice. The body is temporary. The spirit is eternal. What we mistake for illness may be transformation. Mara closed her laptop, unease coiling in her stomach. Jonathan had been so focused on medical solutions that he'd never considered the psychological warfare that might have been waged during those months when Eleanor had access to Olivia. What had she said to a grieving 7-year-old? What seeds had she planted? Mara began testing her theories carefully. She moved objects in Olivia's room, noting what triggered reactions. The antique dresser in the corner? Visible distress when Mara opened its drawers. The closet? The bathroom? No issues. But anything involving the bed itself made Olivia's breathing accelerate. Mara started mapping Olivia's eye movements. Where she looked. Where she refused to look. The patterns emerged. She never looked under the bed. Never. Even when something fell, a book, a glass of water, Olivia would panic rather than lean over to see where it had gone. "Sweetheart," Mara said gently one afternoon, "did someone tell you not to look under your bed?" Olivia's whole body went rigid. "It's okay. You don't have to answer," she said. Olivia's voice was barely audible. She said Mommy left something there. Something to help me find her. But I have to be ready. I have to be. She started crying silently, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. I have to be empty enough to go. Mara felt ice slide down her spine. Who said that, Olivia? But the girl had retreated again, pulling the blanket over her head, whispering frantically to the empty air. Mara waited until 2 a.m. Jonathan was in his office, drowning in work he couldn't focus on. The night nurse had been dismissed. Mara had taken over full-time care. The house was as quiet as it ever got, just the hum of expensive appliances and the distant crash of waves against cliff rock. Olivia was finally asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. Mara stood beside the bed, her heart pounding with certainty born from 3 decades of experience. Whatever was destroying this child wasn't in her blood or her bones or her brain chemistry. It was in her environment, in her beliefs, in whatever poison had been placed in her mind. And Mara suspected the physical evidence was right where the psychological terrorism had taken root. She knelt slowly on the plush carpet, her knees protesting. The space beneath the bed was dark despite all the lamps, a pocket of shadow that the light couldn't seem to reach. Mara pulled her phone from her pocket, activated the flashlight, and looked under the bed. At first, she saw nothing. Just carpet and the wooden frame and dust that the cleaning service had missed. Then her light caught something. Far back, pushed against the wall where small hands could reach but adult eyes wouldn't naturally notice. A black velvet box, tied with twine in a pattern that looked almost ritualistic. Mara's breath caught. She reached forward, her fingers brushing the velvet. It was cold, unnaturally cold, like it had been stored in a freezer. But more than that, it felt wrong. Heavy with intention. Deliberate as a curse. Behind her, Olivia stirred. "Don't," she whispered, terror thick in her voice. "Don't touch it. It's hers. It's for me. You'll make her angry." But Mara's fingers had already closed around the box. And when she pulled it into the light, she knew with absolute certainty that she'd found the source of everything. The question was, what would they find inside? The velvet was wrong. Not just cold, though it was that, ice against Mara's palms despite the heated room. But the texture itself felt corrupted somehow, like fabric that had absorbed something toxic. Her fingers wanted to recoil, but she forced them to grip tighter. The box resisted. Not physically. There was no weight or friction that shouldn't exist. But Mara felt it nonetheless. A psychological resistance, as if the object itself didn't want to be moved from its hiding place. As if it had been positioned there with such deliberate intention that removing it was a violation. She pulled harder. The twine binding it was knotted in a pattern Mara recognized from her childhood in rural Pennsylvania. Her grandmother had tied similar knots over doorways, claiming they kept bad spirits out. Or trapped them in. "Please," Olivia whispered from the bed, her voice breaking. "Please don't open it." Mara stood, the box cradled in her hands like evidence. "Olivia, sweetheart, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" The girl's hollow eyes filled with tears. She said if anyone else touched it, Mommy would be angry. She said Mommy left it just for me. "Your grandmother told you that?" A tiny nod. Mara's jaw tightened. She moved to the chair, positioned so Olivia could see her face but not the box itself. Her fingers worked at the twine, methodical despite the urgency screaming through her veins. The knot came loose. She lifted the lid. The photograph was on top. Caroline Hart, Mara recognized her from pictures throughout the mansion, smiled from what looked like a beach sunset. Beautiful, vibrant, alive. Except someone had taken a pen or marker and systematically scratched out her eyes. Not violently but carefully, deliberately, until her face became something nightmarish. Beneath it, a child's hospital bracelet. Baby girl Hart, printed in faded ink, with a birth date and weight. Olivia's first identification in the world. Next, dried flower petals, roses, perhaps, tied with what Mara realized with horror was human hair. Dark brown, like Caroline's in the photograph. Like it had been cut from the dead woman herself. And at the bottom, a letter. The handwriting was shaky but elegant, the script of someone educated and deliberate. "My dearest Olivia, your mother is so lonely. She calls for you every night. I hear her in my dreams, weeping because you're still here and she's cold and alone in the dark. She shouldn't be alone, baby girl. Daughters belong with their mothers. If you become very still, very quiet, very empty, the space between this world and hers grows thin. Food makes you heavy. Laughter ties you here. Sleep on the edge of your bed, right where I showed you, and don't let yourself get too comfortable in this world. The box will help you remember. Look at it when you forget why you need to fade. Your mother is waiting. She shouldn't have to wait much longer. If you stop eating, if you go quiet, your body will become light enough to cross over. That's what love is, being willing to leave everything to be with the people who need you most. Be brave, my darling. Be empty. Be ready. Grandmother Eleanor will check on you soon. Keep our secret safe, and soon you'll be with Mommy again, where you belong." Mara's hands shook. This wasn't mental illness speaking. This was calculated psychological warfare waged against a grieving child. Every word chosen to exploit a 7-year-old's desperate need for her dead mother. Every instruction designed to trigger self-destruction disguised as love. "Get Jonathan," Mara said to the empty room, her voice barely controlled. "Get him now." Jonathan took one look at the contents spread across Mara's lap and made a sound no father should ever make. Not quite a scream. Not quite a sob. Something animal and raw that came from a place beyond language. "That's my mother's handwriting," he whispered. Then louder, "That's my mother's fucking handwriting." His hands clenched into fists. The carefully controlled tech mogul, the man who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without raising his voice, looked ready to put his fist through the nearest wall. "She was here. I let her in. After Caroline died, she came to me and said..." He pressed his palms against his eyes. "She said she wanted to make amends. That life was too short for grudges. That Olivia needed family." "How long did she have access?" Mara asked quietly. 3 months. October through December, 2 years ago." His voice cracked. "She'd come twice a week. Always insisted on time alone with Olivia. Said she was reading her Bible stories, teaching her prayers. I thought it was helping." Olivia seemed calmer after the visits. Not calmer, Mara thought. Conditioned. Jonathan's face transformed as memory surfaced. "Then in January I walked in on one of their sessions. Eleanor had Olivia sitting perfectly still, eyes closed, and she was whispering something I couldn't quite hear. But the look on my daughter's face." He shuddered. "I threw Eleanor out that day. Changed all the codes. Told her never to come back. But the damage was already done." Mara gestured to the box. She'd already planted this. Already spent months telling Olivia that dying was how to reach her mother. Jonathan looked at his daughter, this small, broken thing that had once been bright and loud and alive, and Mara watched something fundamental break inside him. "I let a monster into my home," he whispered. "I gave her access to my child. This is my fault." Mara waited until Jonathan had left, sent him away, actually, because his guilt and rage were filling the room with energy Olivia didn't need. Then she did something counterintuitive. She turned off all the lights. Olivia gasped in the sudden darkness. "It's okay," Mara said softly, moving to sit on the edge of the bed. "I'm right here. You're safe." "But Mommy..." "Your mommy isn't in the dark, sweetheart. That's not how death works." Mara found Olivia's small hand, held it gently. "Your grandmother lied to you. She lied about everything. But I hear her. You hear your own grief. Your own longing. That's normal. That's human. But your mother isn't calling you to die, Olivia. If she could speak to you right now, do you know what she'd say?" Silence in the darkness. Then, what? She'd say, "Life. Grow up. Be happy. Love your father. Have adventures." That's what mothers want for their children, not death, but life. All the life you can possibly have. Olivia's breathing changed. Got faster. Shakier. "There is nothing under your bed that can take you," Mara continued. "There is nothing about you that deserves to disappear. Your grandmother's words were poison, but words can be answered with different words. True words." And then Olivia broke. Not gentle tears, but full-body sobs, months of terror and confusion and desperate longing pouring out. Her small frame shook with it. Mara pulled her close, let her cry into her shoulder, whispered truth into the space where lies had lived. "You're safe. You're loved. You're meant to be here." Over and over until the words started to land. Until Olivia's sobs quieted into exhausted breathing. Until the first tiny spark of hope flickered in the darkness. By dawn, Jonathan had filed for a permanent restraining order. Eleanor's phone numbers were blocked. Her name was added to every security watch list the family had. She vanished without protest, as if she'd expected this outcome eventually. The box was burned in the mansion's fireplace. Photograph, bracelet, letter, hair. Everything. Jonathan stood watching it curl and blacken, his face empty of everything but determination. The lies were buried with the ashes. At noon, Mara brought soup to Olivia's room. Chicken broth. Simple. Olivia stared at the spoon for a long moment. "If I eat," she whispered, "will Mommy be angry?" "If you eat," Mara answered, "your mommy will be proud." Olivia's hand trembled as she reached for the spoon, lifted it to her lips, and swallowed. The spoon trembled against Olivia's lips. One sip, then another. The broth was nothing special, simple chicken stock with a whisper of salt, but Mara watched that child swallow as if witnessing a miracle. Because in a way, she was. Each sip was an act of defiance against months of whispered poison. Each swallow was choosing life over the seductive lies of reunion through death. Olivia managed 4 spoonfuls before exhaustion claimed her. But it was enough. It was a beginning. Recovery didn't happen overnight. The human body, starved and depleted for months, doesn't simply bounce back because the psychological chains have been broken. Olivia's organs had adapted to near starvation. Her muscles had atrophied. Her system had learned to survive on almost nothing. But slowly, agonizingly slowly, she began to return. The second day, she ate half a bowl of broth. The third day, she asked for applesauce. By the end of the first week, Mara brought her cream of wheat with honey, and Olivia finished the entire bowl. "It tastes different," Olivia said quietly, licking the spoon. "Different how?" "Like, it's allowed now. Like food isn't a bad thing anymore." Mara's throat tightened. "Food was never a bad thing, sweetheart. It was keeping you alive even when someone tried to convince you otherwise." 2 weeks after the box was found, color began creeping back into Olivia's face. Just hints at first, a slight pink to her cheeks after eating, a lessening of the gray pallor that had made her look like a ghost. The dark circles under her eyes started to fade. Her hair stopped falling out. 3 weeks in, Olivia sat up without assistance for the first time in months. The effort left her shaking and breathless, but the triumph in her eyes was unmistakable. "I did it," she whispered. "You did it," Mara confirmed, smiling through tears she didn't bother to hide. The first walk happened on a Tuesday morning in late November. Just to the window. 10 steps total. But Olivia stood there in the sunlight streaming through the glass, feeling warmth on her face, and laughed. It was a small sound, rusty from disuse. But Jonathan, passing in the hallway, stopped dead and pressed his hand against the doorframe to steady himself. He hadn't heard his daughter laugh in 8 months. Jonathan Hart had spent his entire adult life building walls. Control was his religion. Logic was his language. Emotion was the enemy of efficiency. But watching his daughter nearly die because he'd let a monster wear the mask of a grieving grandmother had shattered every wall he'd ever constructed. He started therapy in the second week of November. It was Mara who suggested it, gently but firmly. "You're carrying guilt that's going to poison you if you don't address it. And Olivia needs you whole, not broken." The first session, Jonathan sat in the therapist's office, a converted brownstone in San Francisco, nothing like the cold glass towers he was used to, and didn't speak for 20 minutes. Dr. Sarah Chin waited patiently. "Finally, I almost killed my daughter by trying to be kind to my mother." "You tried to give your daughter access to family during grief," Dr. Chin corrected. "That's not the same thing. I should have known. I grew up with Eleanor's obsessions. I knew what she was capable of." "Did you know she was capable of psychological warfare against a 7-year-old? Jonathan's hands clenched. "No. But I should have suspected. I should have watched more carefully. I should have had a crystal ball? Should have been psychic." Dr. Chin leaned forward. "Mr. Hart, you were also grieving. You'd lost your wife. You were trying to hold your company together while raising a traumatized child. Your mother presented herself as support during your darkest moment. That's not weakness. That's being human. Being human almost cost me everything." "Yes," Dr. Chin agreed simply. "That's the risk we all take. Being human means being vulnerable. And vulnerability means sometimes we get hurt. Sometimes people we trust betray that trust. The question isn't how to avoid vulnerability, that's impossible. The question is, What do you do after betrayal? How do you rebuild? Jonathan had no answer. But he kept coming back week after week, learning to sit with the guilt instead of trying to outlogic it. Learning that some problems couldn't be fixed, only felt and eventually integrated. Learning that being a good father meant being honest about being a flawed human. One evening, he sat with Olivia while she ate dinner, actual solid food now, grilled cheese and tomato soup, and said something he'd never said before. "I'm sorry." Olivia looked up, confused. "For what?" "For not protecting you. For letting her in. For not seeing what was happening." His daughter studied him with eyes that had aged beyond their years. Then she reached across the table and patted his hand with small fingers that were finally, slowly, gaining strength. "You didn't know, Daddy. She lied to both of us. That doesn't make it okay." "No," Olivia agreed. "But Mara says healing means forgiving people even when it's not okay. Even when it still hurts." Jonathan looked at this child who was teaching him lessons he should have known, and felt something crack open in his chest. Not breaking. Beginning to breathe. Mara had been hired as temporary medical support. By December, it was clear she'd become something else entirely. She was the first person Olivia asked for in the morning. The steady presence during nightmares that still came occasionally, less frequent now, but persistent. The voice that reminded Olivia that eating was good, that living was allowed, that her mother's love didn't require self-destruction. "Will you stay?" Olivia asked one afternoon while they worked on a puzzle together. Another sign of returning strength, the ability to focus on something beyond mere survival. "Do you want me to stay?" "Yes." No hesitation. "You feel like safety?" Mara's eyes stung. "Then I'll stay as long as you need me." "Forever." "Let's start with one day at a time." But one day at a time stretched into permanence. Mara moved from the guest quarters into rooms near Olivia's. Her presence became woven into the fabric of the household. Not a servant. Not hired help. Family. Jonathan offered her a salary that made her laugh and cry simultaneously. "You don't have to pay me like a sou. You saved my daughter's life. There's no amount that's adequate." In the end, they settled on something reasonable plus a college fund for Olivia that Mara would help manage. "For when she's ready," Mara said. "And she will be ready. I promise you that." Eleanor Hart never responded to the restraining order directly. But 3 weeks after it was filed, Jonathan received a single letter. No return address. Postmarked from somewhere in Arizona. "You always were ungrateful for the truth. I tried to give that child the greatest gift, reunion with her mother. But you preferred her trapped in this fallen world. The blood of her continued suffering is on your hands." Jonathan read it once, then fed it into the shredder in his office. He could have pursued criminal charges, child endangerment, psychological abuse. His lawyers presented options. But he realized something in those weeks of therapy and watching Olivia slowly heal. Revenge wouldn't undo the damage. Justice wouldn't erase the months of terror. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply close the door and refuse to reopen it. Eleanor was gone. That was enough. Let her live with her twisted beliefs in whatever isolated corner she'd retreated to. His focus was on the life she'd tried to destroy, and helping it bloom again. By January, the Hart mansion no longer felt like a mausoleum. Olivia's laughter echoed in the marble halls, tentative at first, then growing stronger. She started requesting music during meals, asked for her favorite movies, began drawing again, though her subjects had changed from princesses to things more grounded. Trees, birds, Mara's face in careful pencil strokes. The cold spots in her bedroom vanished once the box was destroyed. The air vents returned to normal functioning. The draft ceased. Or perhaps they'd always been normal, and the house had simply reflected the darkness that lived within it. Now that darkness was gone, and the space remembered how to hold light. One afternoon in late January, 6 months after Mara first looked under the bed, Jonathan found Olivia outside on the terrace. She wore a thick sweater against the ocean breeze, but her face was lifted to the sun, eyes closed, a smile playing at her lips. "Hey, little light," he said, using the nickname he hadn't spoken in a year. She opened her eyes, and they sparkled. actually sparkled, the way they used to before grief and poison dimmed them. "Hey, Daddy. What are you thinking about? How good the sun feels. How hungry I am for lunch. How Mara promised to teach me to bake cookies tomorrow." She paused. "Normal things. I'm thinking about normal things, and they make me happy." Jonathan sat beside her, put his arm around her shoulders that finally had some flesh on them again, some substance, some life. "Normal things are pretty extraordinary," he said. "Yeah," she agreed. "They really are. Real danger doesn't announce itself with fangs and shadows. It doesn't hide under beds or lurk in closets. It comes through whispered words from trusted voices. Through manipulation disguised as love. Through fear dressed up as guidance. The monsters we should fear most are the ones who know how to exploit grief, how to weaponize longing, how to turn a child's love for her dead mother into a slow-motion suicide. They don't claw at the door. They're invited inside. And they leave poison hidden where only the innocent will find it. But here's the other truth: healing is possible. Light can return. Children are resilient in ways that defy logic. And sometimes salvation comes not from expensive specialists or high-tech solutions, but from someone patient enough to watch, brave enough to look where others won't, and wise enough to speak truth into spaces where lies have made their home. Olivia Hart didn't die in that mansion. She lived. And that stubborn, beautiful, hard-won survival was the real miracle. The kind that money can't buy. The kind that only love, real love, can create. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.